Well, here I come, sliding into the park bench, right? It's not a park bench, it's a picnic table at a park. And boy, is it warm out here in South Carolina. I'm not sure when you're watching this, but I am filming it in the middle of July. Over my right shoulder, you probably cannot see, is a wonderful picnic table in the shade. But the camera, you don't want it. Too much shade. I look like a shady Grady. It's just, lighting is important for camera, according to my brother. He's a freelance photographer in Los Angeles who I wish was here doing this for me. And if you're peeking at it, Jeff, to give me pointers, help a brother out, man. Inbox me. Text me. Anyway, okay, so what's today's beverage? I don't recommend it, but I'm not a coffee drinker and I need every ounce of this before I get started. Early rise this morning. That's probably in the field of view. Early rise this morning, and I'm not a coffee drinker. Long story, but let's get into it. Why are we here? We're here to look at the book of 2 John in the Single Sister Spiritual Support series. As I open up my, we really can roll these things up, but I didn't do that today. Nobody's doing it on Fort Jackson. I don't know. But Single Sister Spiritual Support series. I'm doing this because as a pastor since 1998, I've run into a lot of wonderful single sisters out there that have said, hey, you know, I need more guidance on how to live in God's kingdom as a single woman. So that's what this is all about. And sneak peek, Mountain Dew's juicing me up. Sneak peek, I will be doing a single men series. I'm thinking about calling it Fatherless Faith. This one is for, actually it's not for single men, it's for men that didn't have a father to teach them the spiritual things of God, okay? Fatherless Faith is what it's called, so married or single guys. But so if you got sons, this is the next one, next item up for bid, all right? Won't tell you what book I'm gonna go through. You'll have to just figure that one out. You'll have to, you know, ponder and maybe tune in, right? Okay, so 2 John, that's where we are. I'm going to read it right fast, okay? Why not? Let's just do it. 2 John, beginning with verse 1. You'll see me wipe a lot, okay? If you're out here with me, this is what I will be doing. The elder, to the chosen lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, will be with us in truth and love. It has given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new command, but one we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another, and this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love. Many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have come out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what you have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take him into your house or welcome him. Anyone who welcomes him shares in his wicked work. So I'm going to stop right there in verse 11. We're almost to the end, actually. Of the scripture itself, I have some special additions at the very end to talk about categories of single ladies. We'll talk about that in the next episode in further detail. But today is really a continuation, more practical application of what we talked about last time. Now, this is unscripted, not a lot of notes. My notes are just 5 words, okay, which I'll share with you in a minute. But I did want to take this scripture and hold it in front of the camera. I thought it would be cool. You could always pause it and read it for yourself. The exact scripture that I'm reading. I hope I'm doing this in a steady way. I will zoom it in slowly. Hopefully you got that. Probably went too far. Who knows? But pause it wherever it works. 1984 New International Version is what I'm using if you're looking for that. But What have we talked about so far? A lot of things. This should be episode 15. And we've talked about truth. We've talked about love. We've talked about obedience. We've talked about, and we're still talking about deceivers. Last, or less than 14, we talked about knowing the real thing, okay? Instead of focusing on what the counterfeit folks do, focus on the real thing. What does a real man of God look like? And we talked about the difference between an elder and a deacon for biblical purposes and for your understanding, okay? The biblical account shows that the elders were more senior men in the community who were God-fearing. We're talking about the church community in Eastern society during biblical times, during Jesus' time, and during Paul's time afterwards, okay? And in the case of John, who was writing in his latter years, all the apostles were deceased, so you could say it was going into the 2nd century, okay? So in the early 2nd century, an elder was a more senior man, whatever that age was. Let's just say, for American purposes, that it's someone who qualifies for Social Security, all right? Who's in the church, who's got some gray hair, who's lived a life of faith that's a little bit longer. I hope I'm not shaking the table. I probably am. And he's got some status, and he has, in the church, he's in good standing. He's proven to be a godly man over time. So what's a deacon? A deacon is a younger man, aspiring elder, okay? And he is being taught, mentored by these elders, okay? So that's the best way for a young man to progress in the faith, and that's one of the ways that I've progressed in the faith. But that's not the focus of today's message. The focus of today's message is a little bit of, there goes my napkin, a little bit of practical application of the faith that we share, okay, for a woman. And remember, I told you that in order to not fall for a counterfeit, you got to know what the real thing looks like. But I also need you to be the real thing. Okay, so I need you to be walking with Christ in a way that is, where you're growing in Him, that you're obedient to Him, as it said here, that you know that Jesus is the truth, He provides the truth, that you're reading your Bible, that you've got an infrastructure in your life, a spiritual infrastructure that helps you to stay strong. And that's another way that you can prevent a deceiver from coming into your life. And here John is very explicit with it. He says, don't allow someone like that into your household. And before, in other lessons, it said, don't lose what you've worked for. Can you imagine a man coming into your life, wooing you, and then you marry this individual, and then he saps everything that you've worked for dry, your money, your vehicle, your house, your condo, your apartment, that it just wrecks it. And that has happened. And a lot of times it happens through divorce and taking half and, all kinds of awful things. So how do you prevent that? Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're single, I'm going to talk a little bit more practically today. And this is coming from a pastoral standpoint. And I'll probably give some scripture references without turning to them today, because I'm trying to make sure this is around 30 minutes. But let's just talk about some of the hot topics and not even circumvent them, all right? Because that's the kind of guy I am. I just hit it head on. Dating, okay? Here's a question. Where's your dating pool? And where are your expectations? What's the origin of your expectation for dating? Okay? Dating is a Western concept. It's not an Eastern concept. And everybody has to, wrap your brain around the fact that the Bible is an Eastern book. There's very few Westerners that wrote in the Bible. And some of the Westerners that did write, they had an Eastern brain. So Paul was a Roman citizen, and Rome was a lot like the United States. But Paul had an Eastern brain because he was a Jew, and he understood the Eastern thought of the Old Testament. Now, you might sit up and say, well, I live in the United States, or I live in whatever your country is, but the biblical context is Eastern, and everything Eastern is not bad. So, people in the East today, they don't date the way we do in America in some parts of those societies. And you might say, well, they're oppressed. I will give you that. I've seen it myself. I'm an Iraq war veteran, 26 months. Okay, so I've been over there. I've been to Kuwait. I've been to Iraq. I've been to northern Iraq. I've been to Baghdad. I've been to, Syrian border. Okay, I get it. There are places that are oppressive, but there are aspects of Eastern society that are positive. For example, fathers taking care of their daughters and screening their suitors. That is not a bad thing, especially if your dad is living and he's a believer. In American society, we have this, fantasy that we can allow our 15-year-old daughter to get picked up in a vehicle by a 17-year-old who's governed by his hormones, and they're going to go out. He doesn't even hardly know how to drive. He's got a little job at the wherever, and we just think that that's okay. I mean, where did that come from? Did that come from the Lord? Did you pray and ask the Lord, is it okay for my 15-year-old to be picked up by a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old and taken away? Is that person trustworthy? I mean, they're not ready to be a deacon, let alone an elder in the church. You're talking about a youth, someone that hadn't even learned how to be a man. And I got 4 sons and a daughter. She's the youngest. And all 4 of my sons, the rule was dating is an interview process for marriage. And my sons, when they were in high school, they said, Dad, I kind of want to go on a date. I said, can you support the woman that you're taking out? No, sir. Can you pay for anything if there's an accident? No, sir. Can you promise to the dad that you will take care of that woman if anything happens to her, young woman? No, sir. Then you're not going on a date. That's how we did it. And it worked out for them. They turned out okay. They weren't, lost in the sauce when it came to relationships. Now, they were allowed to have friends, and they were allowed to go out and, go in groups, and they were allowed to go to church functions with just youth. And on occasion, they were allowed to have visitation in the house with parents, if they were interested. But that was very rare. I don't even know if that actually happened until they were grown. But it preserved a lot of daughters from heartache. And one of my sons, he had a girlfriend at school, in middle school, and he came home one day and he was all sad. I was like, what's wrong? He said, the girl I said I like, I broke up with her because I didn't want to be her boyfriend, and it was terrible. She burst into tears and ran off. And I said, how did that make you feel? How did that make you feel to do that to somebody's daughter? And I did it, I got experience in that, unfortunately. But he said, I felt terrible. I said, then don't ever do that again to anybody's daughter. You see why I don't want you dating? And he never forgot it. Never forgot it. And now he's engaged. That young man is engaged now to a Proverbs 31 woman, as a 25-year-old man. Okay, now he's not perfect, but it kept him from breaking hearts and having his own heart broken. So as I go back to you, as I'm pounding the table and making an earthquake probably on the video, but where's your dating pool, and where do you get your expectations for dating? Try something, okay? If you're single and you don't have any prospects, not talk about somebody that's engaged or somebody that you're dating someone seriously and that person is a godly man and you're just trying to, strengthen yourself. If you're single with no prospects, or prospects that are like, I don't really know that person, try something. Just say, dating to me, try this. Dating to me is an interview process for marriage only. Now, if you're single and you never want to marry, that's different. That's you are free to see people and things like that. But be careful. Don't string somebody along or make them fall in love with you when you have no intentions of, you just want to serve the Lord all your days, But if you're interested in having a husband, consider that. Dating is an interview process for marriage. You're the manager. You're not woe is me. You're the manager. You're the CEO of your household. And you're doing an interview. You're taking interviews. It's a privilege to have an interview with you. You're a Proverbs 31 woman. You're a chosen lady. Not by me, not by the doggone President of the United States even, but by God himself. He chose you. So you're a VIP, as we say in the Army. In the Army, when there's a VIP, they assign they don't let junior officers do that stuff. They get senior officers. And I used to be the aide to the chief of chaplains, 2-star general working at the Pentagon. And when a VIP came, they didn't just, send anybody. They said, you're the chief's aide, go down there, pick that person up at the Pentagon, escort them up to the chief's office, and, rush them into the chief of chaplain's office, and that's VIP treatment. That's the way you should be treated. And so you are the CEO of your household, and you take interviews, and it's a privilege, not a right, for someone to see you, to even call you, to even text you. Is a privilege. And I'm jumping down. This was number 1, was dating. I'm just jumping down to number 5, self-worth. How do you describe yourself, and where did those words come from? Do you call yourself overweight, underweight, too short, not pretty, too dark, too light, hair too thin? All these things, eyes too small, washed up, old maid, all of these things that people say. Where did you get that from? God didn't give you that. And I'm sorry that I'm fussing at you, but I'm fussing at you in love. Don't do that. Don't let those words come out of your mouth. That is not who you are. The only address that John gives to this woman is the chosen lady, chosen by God. And let me tell you, John knew about that because he took care of Mary. If you go back to my initial episode, he took care of Mary. Jesus told him to take care of Mary. I'm talking about the mother of Jesus. And Mary was a widow, we believe, at that time, or Jesus wouldn't have said, take care of my mom. He would have said, Mary, go back to Joseph. But Joseph wasn't there because Mary probably got married when she was very young. And so John knew that, to take care of Mary meant this is an example of how women in the church should be treated. What I do with Mary, I need to be doing with teaching other men to do with the women out there. You're precious. Think of yourself in that way. And heck yeah, be by yourself before you go out with a clown. I'm going to put a clown emoji right here. Clown. Don't go out with a clown. Don't waste your time. Man, let me tell you, when I was at the chief of chaplain's office, there were people who could not ring his phone. In fact, nobody rang his phone. They rang my phone. And then, he gave them a card, meet them out in these business transactions and give it, to somebody. And then they think they had his phone in his desk. No, they rang my desk. I was basically his secretary. And everybody didn't get an audience with them. You can't let everybody have an audience with a 2-star. There's just not enough time in a day. And so some people, they just talk to me. That's it, and not very long. And sometimes they didn't even get me. So just know you got to treat yourself like that. You're important. Everybody can't have an audience with you. If somebody's not a believer for dating purposes, they don't get an audience with you. They don't get an audience with you. Don't let them have an audience with you, because you've got to keep your schedule clear for a real man, for a Boaz. Okay? If you don't know who Boaz is, read the book of Ruth. God put a love story right there in the Bible. Every romantic woman should be familiar with the book of Ruth. Where do you get your dating? Our expectations in America are just too high. Expectation here, men are here, and they'll never measure up. Just lower your expectations. And what I don't mean compromise. What I mean is understand who men really are. I've been married for 25 years, and I love my wife. But when I see a beautiful woman, she's a beautiful woman. I can't control that. I can't. I can control whether or not I approach her or, ask her for a phone number, but I can't control the fact that when I see her, she's gorgeous. You got to understand that there's no perfect man. I don't want a man that ever look at anybody else. Just look at me. Well, then you going to blind him? Okay, so put the emoji with the shades on. All right, here's the second thing. Dating. All right. So going back to dating. I'm cracking myself up. That was too much. All right, so for dating, don't let anybody that's an unbeliever. Don't date someone like that. Date someone that is a believer and make sure they're vetted. That they're vetted. Know who they are. I'm going back to my executive assistant example. Every time somebody came to see the chief of chaplains, there was a folder that I give them, pretty green folder with the Army seal on it, with a file on that person that I had read and told them, this is who this is where they work. Here's the, and the chief always wanted to know their family, He's got a wife and 3 kids, or, she's single and she's, a single mom, she's a general officer in the, signal world or something like that. A file. I have a file on these people. And, I told you last time, if you have a pastor in a church, somebody in that church better vouch for them. And if somebody says they're a believer and they don't have a church, like, well, unless it's an extenuating circumstance. I've been in prison for 3 years and I'm out and I've got my first job and I just moved here or something like that, yeah, you could date a guy that's moved on from a criminal record, yes, but, I was trying to use an extreme example, but the point is, they got to have some credentials. It's not popping up out of the blue saying that they are who they are. How are you going to know if they're lying or not? What were they born as? Who can vouch for that? All right, so that brings me to the number 2 is sex. All right, so number 1, dating. Number 5, where'd you get your self-worth? Number 2, sex. Where do you, and I'm not talking about male or female, I'm talking about sexuality. Where do you get your definition, your, as we say in the Army, left and right limits of your sexuality? Where'd that come from? From what you did back in the day? From your previous marriage? From what some guy told you that sounded, like men like that? Where do you get it from? Did you know there's a book of the Bible that talks about intimate things? Song of Solomon. Great book to read. Kind of juicy. But that's the start of physical love in the Bible, the Song of Solomon. Song of Songs, it's also called. Okay? And, we're just way out in left field in America with sexuality. It's not even left field. It's not even on the playing field. God has a playing field if you think about baseball for sex. He's got a playing field. And some people start on the playing field, take the bat and the balls, and then they jump the fence, go out into the parking lot, down the street into the red light district, and that's where they want to play baseball. Okay. And so that's where they play. And so the ladies are like, wow, let me see, I want to see you play baseball. And they say, yeah, come on down. And they're down there in the red light district playing in a sandy, dirty, nasty, drug needle infested, alcohol bottle, laying in the parking lot baseball game. And so the ladies think this is baseball. That's not baseball. Baseball's down at the stadium. Can you see my analogy? The stadium has a playing field, and on that playing field is God's system, which you play in that playing field when nobody else is around. God's built a beautiful stadium for you to play in with just a man and a woman who are married. Okay, a man and a woman who are married. And, newsflash, you don't understand sexuality until you've been married and intimate with someone who's another believer that loves the Lord and loves you over time. Did you hear what I just said? You learn about intimacy when you're married to a man who loves God. Because if he doesn't love the Lord, he doesn't love Jesus Christ, he cannot. He is incapable of loving you. He can't. And if I could get that through, like some sisters, I just want to cut their head open and then drop that in there and close their head and sew it back up. A man is incapable of loving you if he does not love God, because God is love. How's he going to love you? He can't. And so, if you're sneaking and watching this and you're married and your husband's an unbeliever, he's loving you in his worldly way. He's doing the best he can. Just like there's earthly wisdom and there's heavenly wisdom. Someone who only believes in earthly wisdom will never achieve the heavenly wisdom in their head. It'll never happen because they don't believe it. They don't have the Holy Spirit inside of them to interpret. And in the same way, if someone does not believe in the Lord, they can only love you with earthly love, which is so shallow. It's like the difference between playing in a puddle versus going to swim in the ocean. With the ocean being the love that between a man and a woman who both believe, and Adam and Eve kind of love. Okay, and so I'll say it again. I'll summarize it. When a man loves the Lord, and he loves you, and he marries you, and you become intimate, over time, you will see what God's sexuality is. You're not going to see it on your honeymoon. You're not going to see it after a year, which, an extended honeymoon is highly recommended when you get married. You'll see it over time. And if I can be frank, my wife and I, we blossomed around the 7-year mark when I went off to war. She thought she was going to lose her husband. And then I came back, it was a teaser. I came back on a 15-day break from Iraq. What a heartbreak that is, to leave the second time. It's worse than leaving the first time. But, that's when our sexual intimacy blossomed, because we had been through struggle and parenting and loss of friends, dying in a war. And, that's you start to develop an intimacy with a person when you go through things, is my point. Okay? The honeymoon is wonderful, but it pales in comparison to the overtime piece. So if a man hasn't stayed with you over time, married, loving you and loving the Lord, you haven't learned about sexual love. You might actually be a sexual virgin, a God's standard virgin. And if you are, that's great, because if you want to be married, then that person, in the future, you'll be able to experience that. And you can say, I'm a love virgin. Say that. That's who you are. You're a love virgin. Nobody loved you. It's okay. No, if nobody loved you, God did, and God will give you a Boaz. All right. Now, I know this may be painful for some, and you might even be crying right now, but you didn't do anything wrong, okay? You didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an awful person, and I'm going to go and sleep with however many men you slept with. I mean, it generally speaking, men trick women into getting into the bedroom, okay? Now, you might have been one of those women like, no, it was the other way around. I did it to the guy. But, God will forgive you of that, okay? That's all in the past. We're not dwelling on that, don't define yourself by your past when God's forgiven you of it. And if you've never asked for forgiveness, just tell him. You can say it. Like, he knows about sex, okay? He invented it. So you can say, Lord, I did this. It was my choice. Forgive me. Now, let me add a caveat. I'm not talking about rape. I'm not talking about when someone abused you. I'm not talking about that. That was not your fault. You didn't sin in that. So if you lost your virginity because someone abused you or they raped you, that's not your fault. You didn't sin at all. Okay? The other person did, and they're going to have to answer to God for that. And that I wouldn't want to do that. I would not want to have to answer to God for abuse or rape of a woman. Okay? So I know I'm being very plain on this, and I wish I had more time, but just let your definition and expectations of sexuality match the Bible. And it takes a very mature man to say, like I'm telling you about me, and I've told my wife, I learned about sexual things through sin, and that memory is still there, so I have to get rid of that sewage and drink pure water. And that takes time. I've been married, 26 years, and I'm still learning. And anybody that sits there and says they got it all figured out, they're not. They're either naive or they're lying, because women change over time. Okay, at one point in my life, my wife was fertile. At this point in her life, she's not, because she went through cancer treatment. And so now, she's different than she was when I married her. She was a young maiden when I married her. Now she's a mature woman who's been through struggle and has given birth to 5 children, and 2 are with the Lord. We lost 2. And she's a different person, and so are you. However old you are, you're not who you were, a decade ago. Or you're not the same person you were in your first marriage or your second marriage or your third. You are who you are. And if you're single, God will work with you wherever you are. So let's go to the third one. I'm gonna have to go a little faster. Where's your parenting guide? Where have you been as a parent? Where'd you get your guidelines for parenting? Okay, God has standards for that also. Okay, and if you're a parent and you're single, and my sister went through that. She's a parent of 2, and my sister Stephanie, my blood sister, she was very careful about suitors around her kids. Because they have a dad, and she didn't want them to think that they had multiple dads. Okay, and if you're if you're a woman that doesn't have kids, then you don't have to worry about that in the dating experience, someone, accepting your children. But if you do have children, that person needs to accept your children. They need to be willing to adopt your children if they're going to marry you. And there are men that will do that. I just officiated a wedding for one who did that, And so the last one is church. Do you have a church home? The church home is the social anchor for a single woman. Not your job, not the nice neighborhood you moved to, or the not so nice neighborhood that's got great neighbors. And I'm talking about in a secular sense. If you got believing neighbors, that is a form of the church now. Okay, but your anchor is your church home, your pastor, the women of the church that are senior to you, that minister to you, and if you're the senior person, the young women that you are ministering to, that's your anchor. If you don't have a church home, it's more difficult to spot a counterfeit. It is, because you don't have a system in place to help screen. As a pastor, I have always screened men for women that wanted me to do that, and they said, I don't have a dad, my dad passed away, will you screen the people I'm dating? And I mean, people young ladies have done that from a distance. I want you to video chat with this guy, and it's okay to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not trying to beat them over the head, but I at least want to see, do you believe? Who's your pastor? I need to talk to your pastor, that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is just a few things. I'll list them again: dating, sex, parenting, church, self-worth. I've talked about those. Okay, what's the moral of the story is, you, young lady, more mature lady, you need to have the proper infrastructure spiritually to be able to spot a counterfeit. Live a celibate, wholesome life. And you might say to yourself, well, I'm living with a guy. And I'm going to, let me say this carefully. I know a female minister who told me, in confidence, I'm living with someone. She said she was divorced, and she was afraid to marry. But they were living together and they were having sex. And she's a minister. Now, that was confidential, so I didn't tell any of the powers that be or anything like that, but I did advise her. I said, you got to either get married or get out of that. You've got people, you've got a flock, and they think you're one way and you're something else. You're being the counterfeit. So in your case, if you're living with someone, what does the Lord want you to do? Does the Lord want you to live with someone that's not your husband and have sex with them? I mean, the old saying, Why buy the cow if when you're getting the milk? I mean, that's a bad analogy because shouldn't call a woman a cow, but you get the point that if you think low of yourself, that's exactly how a man's going to think of you. If you say that I am so lonely that I will take a man into my house and pay rent and let him just live here as long as I can have someone laying next to me at night and someone to, wash my car and, be my man when I go somewhere, and you're just sleeping together and he's getting what he wants out of you and never marrying you. I've seen that so many times. He's using you. And what godly man, what person who is a biblical deacon or biblical elder would do that to anyone's daughter? Who? I don't, it doesn't compute. That's somebody's daughter, that's somebody's cousin, that's somebody's mama, that's somebody's sister. And you have no scruples? You will do them like that? No. And in the end, that chosen lady is God's daughter. And that has kept me out of many a woman's house. Because she's one of two people's daughters. She's either the devil's daughter and ain't going to go nowhere near the devil's daughter, or she's God's daughter. And I don't want to have to answer to that. I don't want to answer to God. Satan will try to kill you, and God is going to be standing there waiting on you for an explanation of why you went and slept with my daughter, married man. What'd you do that for? So I fussed today. I did, and I don't know how long I've been going at this thing. It's like I should be around the 30-minute mark. Look, I gotta go back to work. Okay, it's hot. I've been sweating all over the video. I'll try to put what I've summarized the stuff over in here. Okay, and examine yourself. Read the word and examine yourself. Look at your life. Be bold. Be bold enough to take a stand and say, I'm not doing this anymore. What do you have to lose to be obedient to God? And I have one of my dear sisters who was already engaged and sleeping with a guy, and she got close to the Lord, and I said, hey, shouldn't be fornicating. And she said, you're right. That's what the word says. And she told her so-called believing fiance that, and he got mad and poked his lip out and was like, well, and he walked. And, like one preacher said, bye. You got to be ready to let him go. And what happened? Found another husband. Not another husband because they never got married. She found a husband, got married, still married to this day, got kids, living a great life. God will take care of you. Have faith in him. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Ain't nothing else to say after that. Have faith. All right? Talk to you soon.